Hi everybody, welcome back to the Rummage workshop. This week I'm refinishing this gorgeous mid-century dresser. As you can see, the wood grain on this piece is just absolutely stunning, and outside of some chunks taken out of a few drawer fronts, this piece is in amazing condition. I can't wait to see it all cleaned up. Let's get started. So I usually start off by cleaning everything from top to bottom, but I'm going to switch up my process on this project to try and work a little bit more efficiently. I've noticed that after sanding, I basically have to re-clean the entire piece a second time. So I'm going to wait to clean everything with a degreaser until after I strip and sand. I know, absolute blasphemy, but I'll let you know how it goes. So as you just saw, the top drawer runner is broken, so I set that aside and added it to my repair list. Well, it looks like the bottom drawer runner is having some issues as well. I added that to my repair list and double checked the rest of the runners down the line. The top runner was completely borked, so I measured and ordered a new drawer runner off of Amazon. Hopefully it comes in time. And luckily the bottom runner just needed to be hammered back into position and drilled into place. I made sure to test it a few times in the drawer slot just to make sure that everything was exactly where it needed to be. This poor top drawer has been through it, you guys. On top of everything else, I noticed that the drawer blocks were disconnected, so I loaded them up with glue, clamped them down, and let that dry overnight. Now it's time to patch up all the chunks that have been taken out of the top drawer front. It looks like somebody's already attempted a repair in the past, so I'm going to try and get as much of this material out before slapping more on. So I'm just taking a blade to cut and scrape away that material. Once I scrape that away, I mix up a batch of Bondo and start filling in all of those spots. I use a piece of painter's tape to help reshape my corners and hold the material in place along the missing edges. And don't worry, we're going to talk about the weird napkin contraption that I have going on right now. Scraping away the material from the previous repair, I got distracted by some peeling up veneer, so after about a 30-minute detour to glue that all back down, I then returned to my previously unfinished task. Story of my life. While the Bondo cures, I'm going to start working on the box. I mulled over the design of this piece quite a bit. Because of the severe damage on two of the drawers, I decided to paint them while exposing the wood handles for dimension. And since this fabulous veneer on the box is in such amazing condition, I get to expose every last inch of it. Since that means a friggin' buttload of sanding, I'm gonna save my back a bit by first removing the finish with a chemical stripper. I'm removing the feet so that I can work on them separately. I'm still deciding whether or not to paint them or stain them. Today I'm using Citrus Strip. It's yet another in a long line of strippers that I've used that are just okay. If you have one that you love, please let me know in the comments. I would love to try it out. I find that with any stripper, it's the technique that really matters. Paint it on densely and then seal it with a plastic wrap so that it can do its job before it dries out. After covering the entire piece, I let that sit for about an hour until I can start to see the brown finish dissolve into the stripper. Then I come back in with a putty knife, scraping away the goop in the direction of the wood grain. One thing to be said for Citrus Strip, unlike other strippers, it's biodegradable and can be thrown away right in the garbage. Be sure to read the directions on your strippers to make sure that you're disposing of it properly in your area. Finally, I came in with mineral spirits and a piece of fine steel wool to deactivate the stripper and to remove any residue. I then let this dry for several hours. In the meantime, I set to work on the legs and the drawers. I'm using 150 grit sandpaper to scuff up the drawer fronts, then fully remove the finish from the handles. After getting most of it off with my sander, I then come in with a sanding block to finish it out, careful not to remove any of the curves from the handles. I then use a block with 220 grit sandpaper to refine the texture, then move on to the rest of the drawers. Next, I sand smooth my Bondo patches, taking extra care around the edges to mimic the existing shape. Then I scuff up the legs. I've actually opted to paint them rather than stain for a more balanced look in the design. Now that the box is completely dry, I start carefully sanding down every inch. Start with 150 grit sandpaper until I've removed the majority of the finish, using extra care around the edges. Make sure to keep your sander flat to the surface as you near the edge. The quickest way to blow through the veneer is to let your sander drop down or curve around the lip. From there, I move to a hand sander. You can continue on with your electric sander if you like, however, this veneer is really thick and in amazing condition and could go through several more refinishings in the future. I want to make sure that I leave as much as possible for the next person. I do that by putting on a podcast and taking my sweet time. And just look at that wood grain. I'm like swooning. It's so pretty. Now that I have the finish fully removed and I have everything right where I want it, I just come back with 220 grit sandpaper to refine the texture. I then do the same along all surfaces and interior edges, then come back and vacuum up my sanding dust. Now that we're all sanded, it's time to clean. So I vacuum everything from top to bottom, then wash with a degreaser and remove the leftover sanding dust from the box with a damp rag. A great way to see what your wood is going to look like naturally is to wet it down. I'm looking for my color to be a bit warmer than this amber. So I'll be applying a light water-based stain to achieve the color I'm looking for. I'm using bare wood stain in the color Dark Walnut. I taped where the drawer meets the handles to keep everything clean, then applied 2 coats of stain on the handles, allowing 2 hours between layers. Next, I set to work on the box. My favorite way to apply stain is with a gloved hand and scraps of old t-shirt. Wipe the stain on in the direction of the wood grain, applying evenly across the entire surface. I let this sit for about 10 minutes, then came back with a clean, dry t-shirt to wipe up the excess. When water-based stains are drying, they can sometimes get this speckled look and you have a damn heart attack. Calm down, don't worry. As your wood fully dries, this uneven look will dissipate. This is the second time I've had this happen to me where I'm like, no, and then everything turns out fine, so just don't worry. I ended up loving the color that I got with just 1 layer of stain, so I left that to dry fully and moved on to priming and painting. Before I prime, I'm taping off the handles, then I applied 2 layers of spray-on clear shellac to the drawer fronts and the legs. Next, I sprayed on 2 thin coats of Fusion mineral paint in the color Bellwood using my HVLP gravity fed spray gun. I've left a link to my video all about my spray gun setup in the description box below. I allow each layer to dry completely, then sand lightly between coats. Once that dried fully, about 4 hours, I put the drawers back into the box and top coated everything using Varathane water-based top coat and a satin sheen. And then disaster struck. When I came back after the top coat had dried, I saw that I had full tannin bleed through on every single drawer. Don't worry guys, she's gonna be just fine. So let's talk a little bit about tannins and tannin bleed through. Tannins are chemical compounds in many woods that protect the tree from infection. Good for trees, bad for furniture painters. As you see here, there's a faint yellowish tint starting to show up through the paint. This only would have gotten worse with time. The best way to prevent this is a shellac or a shellac-based primer. I can't tell you for sure why mine failed me this time. It could have been too thin or not evenly dispersed or not completely dry. So to fix this, I'm pulling the drawers back out. Then I'm going to rewrap the handles to protect them while I'm painting. And I scuffed up the surface of the paint really well for good adhesion. Then I pulled out my fail-safe, very favorite shellac-based primer, Zenzorbin. I then rolled on 2 thin layers and let that dry for several hours before spraying on 2 new coats of paint, following the same rules and steps as before. Then I resprayed a layer of my top coat and let that cure overnight. This was a long detour, but now that everything's dry, you would never know that this ever happened. Now all that's left are the finishing touches. I screwed the legs back on and gave the drawers a refresh using Big Mama's Butter by Dixie Belle. Let me remind you of what this piece looked like before and what it looks like now. guys so much for following along with me today. I'm glad you got to see a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Fortunately, the drawer runner didn't come in time for me to install it for this video, but if you follow me on Instagram, I will be showing you how to install that and cut it down this week in my stories. I'll see you guys back here next week for another furniture transformation.